the prisoner secretly hides in the body bag, ending his 15-year imprisonment. After swimming ashore, Edmund heads to the Isle of Monte Cristo, where he finds the treasure using the map left by Abbe Faria. From then on, he assumes the identity of the Count of Monte Cristo and begins his path of revenge. Following Edmund's instructions, Catullus investigates and uncovers prosecutor Villefort's shocking secret. Villefort had fathered an illegitimate child with Madame Danglars and cruelly buried the infant alive in a wooden box. The midwife who witnessed this attempted to blackmail Villefort but was committed to an asylum. The mansion where the infant was buried is now abandoned and for sale. Edmund keenly perceives this as a crucial element in his revenge plan. Catullus also learns that Mercedes and Fernand have an 18-year-old son, Albert. This news deeply pains Edmund, realizing his once beloved fiancée is now with his enemy. Learning that Albert and a friend are currently vacationing in Rome, Edmund decides to use Albert as the starting point for his revenge. He instructs Catullus to return to Paris and purchase the abandoned mansion, while he and Jacopo head to Rome. They stay at the same London hotel as Albert. Upon learning that Albert is struggling to rent a carriage, Edmund sends Jacopo to pick them up in his own carriage. Edmund emphasizes to Jacopo that all actions must appear smooth and natural, avoiding any suspicion from Albert, lest his meticulously planned scheme fail. Jacopo then knocks on Albert's door, extending the Count of Monte Cristo's lunch invitation. Jacopo describes the Count as omnipotent and accommodating, leading Albert and his friend Franz to eagerly accept. Albert's face indeed resembles Mercedes, causing Edmund some melancholy. He composes himself, displaying extraordinary charisma, and engages Albert in pleasant conversation. The unsuspecting Albert reveals his itinerary and desire to meet Roman beauties. Edmund formulates a further plan based on this information. Before the festival begins, two criminals are to be publicly executed. He invites Albert to watch the execution. Initially uninterested, Albert accepts when Edmund offers to lend them his carriage for the carnival. At the execution site, the two criminals behave differently, one brave, the other too terrified to walk. They are to be beheaded and hammered respectively. Albert finds it somewhat cruel, but Edmund suggests such punishment is still insufficient for their crimes.
Imagine a man who forced you into an existence of pain and misery. Is it enough for him to feel only a few seconds of pain and no more? It'd be fairer to exert vengeance on them slowly, the equivalent of the pain they inflicted on their victims.
Just as the executioner's blade is about to fall, a guard rushes in with a papal pardon. The fearless criminal is pardoned, while the other's skull is immediately crushed. Albert's composure during the execution meets Edmund's expectations, prompting him to continue using Albert in his revenge plan. Albert and Franz receive elegant clothes and a magnificent carriage from Edmund, allowing them to fully enjoy the carnival atmosphere. Suddenly, a beautiful girl catches Albert's attention. She's alluring and graceful, responding to Albert's advances with coy flirtation. The inexperienced Albert, unable to resist such temptation, leaves Franz behind to pursue her. Soon, he's led away from the crowd into a secluded alley. Even when a strange masked figure appears behind him, Albert remains oblivious to the danger, still grinning foolishly at the girl. That evening, just as Franz returns to the hotel, he receives a ransom note. He learns that Albert has been kidnapped by bandits. Unable to pay the enormous ransom, he turns to Edmund for help. Edmund immediately orders Jacopo to prepare firearms and a carriage for Albert's rescue. Outside the hotel, he sternly rebukes the bandit delivering the ransom note. Learning he's the Count of Monte Cristo, the bandit is terrified and quickly apologizes. He then respectfully drives Edmund's carriage. Faced with Franz's shocked and confused expression, Edmund casually mentions having some reputation in the area. The bandit leader also shows great respect upon seeing Edmund. Edmund harshly reprimands him.
The Viscount de Morcerf is a personal friend of mine, and you kidnap him? Hold him to ransom like a dog? Are you mad?
The leader repeatedly apologizes and quickly orders his men to release Albert. Franz excitedly describes to Albert how impressive and respected the Count of Monte Cristo was. They don't realize this was all a performance orchestrated by Edmund. The bandits cooperate with Edmund's act because they owe him a favor. The pardoned criminal at the execution site was a friend of the bandit leader, save thanks to Edmund's substantial bribe to the Pope. With this simple scheme, Edmund easily gains Albert's trust and approval. To express his gratitude, Albert invites Edmund to Paris, offering to be his guide and introduce him to Parisian high society. Edmund is secretly delighted but outwardly appears indifferent. Edmund and Jacopo soon arrive in Paris. He lavishly purchases 2 mansions, preparing for his revenge. The thought of seeing Mercedes, who has haunted his dreams, fills him with mixed emotions, leaving him sleepless. The next day, Edmund visits Albert's home, a residence housing both his enemy and his love. Fernand is absent due to work commitments. Albert introduces Edmund to the secretary of the Minister of Interior and a newspaper editor. During their conversation, Mercedes enters. Despite his mental preparation, Edmund is momentarily stunned. As if through telepathy, Mercedes also appears slightly unsettled. Clearly, the Count's face reminds her of her former love. Mercedes thanks the Count for saving her son's life, her voice trembling slightly. Edmund, too, loses his usual composure, stuttering in response. The atmosphere becomes subtly charged. They awkwardly conclude the meeting. After the guests leave, Mercedes eagerly inquires about the Count's real name, but Albert admits he doesn't know. Back in his carriage, Edmund fights back tears. Despite the years, their love for each other remains palpable. Catullus brings news of a grand opera performance that evening, which Fernand, Danglars, and Villefort will attend. Edmund decides to go to the opera house to see his 3 enemies. He deliberately buys the box directly opposite Fernand's family. Albert immediately introduces Edmund to his father upon seeing him. Fernand is surprised to learn that the Count's box originally belonged to the Austrian ambassador, confirming his belief in Edmund's significance. Edmund observes that Fernand, Danglars, and Villefort's boxes are connected, indicating their continued close relationships. Seeing his 3 enemies together floods Edmund with painful memories and anger. He feels his hatred nearly tearing his heart apart, making breathing difficult. Only with the help of medication does he gradually calm down. After the opera, Albert introduces Edmund to Baron Danglars, the banker, and his wife. Edmund recalls Catullus mentioning that Madame Danglars is the one who bore Villefort's illegitimate child. Danglars could never imagine that this charming count is actually Edmund, whom he framed and sent to prison. Next, Albert introduces Edmund to the Villefort family. Edmund finds it ironic that this respectable, well-dressed royal prosecutor has committed numerous dirty deeds in private. Having successfully established social connections with his enemies, Edmund completes the first step of his revenge plan. Meanwhile, Catullus' mission progresses well. He successfully bribes the asylum guard, planning to rescue tonight the midwife who witnessed Villefort burying the infant alive. However, the guard changes his mind at the last minute, demanding double the payment. Jacopo loses patience and kills the guard. They rescue the midwife and take her to the mansion where Villefort committed his crime. Now owned by Edmund, the midwife recounts the truth from years ago. To protect his reputation, Villefort buried his newborn illegitimate son in the backyard. After he left, the midwife dug up the box and found the baby boy still alive. She identifies the room where Madame Danglars gave birth and where Villefort buried the infant. With this leverage, Edmund can prepare a surprise for Villefort. Meanwhile, Villefort learns of the midwife's escape after killing a guard. Shocked and angry, he orders the inspector to find her at all costs.
And this time she won't be going back to the madhouse, no. I shall send her straight to the guillotine.
Soon after, the Danglars and Villefort couples are invited to tour Edmund's new residence. Seeing the familiar mansion, Villefort feigns composure. Madame Danglars, however, appears visibly uncomfortable, clearly haunted by unpleasant memories. The mansion has been transformed into a luxurious space, filled with rare antiques, impressing even these worldly upper-class individuals. Their belief in the Count's noble status and position deepens. Edmund also shows them his chemistry laboratory. Thanks to the knowledge gained from Faria in prison, he has created many drugs with special effects. When Madame Villefort mentions her son's illness, Edmund generously gives her appropriate medication. He also specifically introduces a poison he concocted, strychnine, which kills without symptoms. This immediately piques Villefort's interest.
Do you have an antidote for brucine?
No, for the mortals there is no antidote.
During lunch, everyone praises Edmund for transforming the once-neglected mansion into such splendor. Edmund explains that the property was previously unsellable due to a frightening rumor. Villefort is so scared he can barely hold his cutlery, while Madame Danglars fails to hide her panic. Madame Villefort, intrigued by the rumor, insists on hearing it. Edmund leads everyone to the birthing room, the only area he left untouched. He mysteriously mentions an infanticide that occurred there. Villefort's face contorts with anxiety, while Madame Danglars looks sorrowful. Fascinated by such unusual stories, Madame Villefort asks Edmund to show them where the infant was buried. Edmund says he dug up the box but found it empty.
Where is this box now?
I had it burned.
Madame Danglars, unable to control her emotions any longer, runs away. Meanwhile, Cataris and the midwife, hiding upstairs, observe the scene. The midwife confirms that Villefort and Madame Danglars were indeed the ones who called her for the delivery that night. Watching Villefort's discomfort and torment, Edmund's lips curl into a barely noticeable smile. The punishment has only just begun.